We're not going to deal with the specific questions per se, as much as there's a broader topic, which is how to respond. And I think that one of the things that I see on a regular basis is people who are confronted or asked or challenged on various issues of Yiddishkeit, and it could be other areas of life as well. And often you find that it doesn't go where it should, doesn't get as far as it could, because it's not as much the content as the technique, and whatever the technique should be under circumstances. That's what the topic we want to deal with today. You find in Chazal, we see in Chazal, there are plenty of examples of Chazal responding. You see that Chazal respond, and they respond in the way that from the response of Chazal, we can see that there is supposed to be a direction. The first example that I want to cite is the famous Gemara in Shabbos, where the ger, the potential convert, comes to Hillel. He says, teach me the entire, I believe you there's a Torah Shabbal Peh, a Torah Shabbat. I don't believe you there's a Torah Shabbal Peh. So what do? Somebody comes over and says, listen, I believe you there's Torah Shabbat. I believe there's a written Torah. I don't believe there's an oral Torah. Now a person can be very, very tempted to immediately jump into the fray and start arguing and prove it and so on and so forth. So what did Hillel do? Hillel proved it to him, and he did it very quickly. Hillel said to him, okay, so I'll teach you, I'll be megar you on condition it's only Torah Shabbat. And he shows him this is an aleph, this is a beis, this is a gimel, this is dot. You got to know how to read Torah Shabbat. The next day he came back to Hillel and Hillel said, this is a dalet, gimel, beis, aleph. Hillel reversed it. So the guy said to Hillel, 1 second, yesterday you told me it's an aleph, beis, gimel, dalet. So Hillel said to him, well, you believed me yesterday when I told you what the letters are, so believe me also when I tell you there's a Torah Shabbal Peh. This is the Gemara says. What's Hillel telling him? What Hillel telling him essentially is, everything in the world has a Torah Shabbal Peh. There's a Torah Shabbal Peh on almost everything that we do. Somebody had to tell us, we see the letters, somebody had to teach us how to read the letters, and that was done through Torah Shabbal Peh. You didn't read how to read the letters. Same thing when it comes to any appliance, any Jewish home usually has a Torah Shabbal Peh. There isn't a washing machine in a Jewish home that just works by pushing the button. There's always you push the button, plus you wedge a comb between the second and third button. Somebody has to tell you that, otherwise it's not going to work. Same thing with microwaves. They'd have to slam with a click and an elbow flick, and there's a Torah Shabbal Peh. And if you ever play Monopoly, so in every Monopoly game there's a Torah Shabbal Peh where you don't have free parking. Right? No Jew is going to waste this space. The Torah Shabbat says that you don't do anything there, right? That we save for Ben Azmanin. During the Zman, we're not going to waste it, so you put money there, either tax money or whatever money that your minhag is in your family. But there's definitely a Torah, there's got to be a Torah Shabbal Peh. So Hillel, just one example, Hillel is showing him, how do you respond? So Hillel didn't get into an argument, didn't get into a fight, he just very, very quickly and very, very cunningly drew him in, and he turned around and said, wow, and he was Biskayer. We find the same similar story, the Medrash says, same similar story with Rav and Shmuel, where a potential convert came to Rav and he said, I believe you there's a Torah Shabbal Peh, I don't believe a Torah Shabbat. So Rav said, okay, this is an aleph and this is a beis. So he said to him, who said it's an aleph? Who said it's a beis? So Rav threw him out. Very similar to Shammai before the convert had gone to Hillel. They went to Shmuel. He said, this is an aleph, this is a beis. And he said to him, who said it's an aleph? Who said it's a beis? So Shmuel reached over and he flicked his ear real hard. The guy went, ow, my ear. And Shmuel said, who said that's an ear? Right? That's what the Medrash says. That means that there's a Torah Shabbal Peh. Otherwise you wouldn't know. How did you know to go? So the Medrash says, I'm not making it as the Medrash says. So Shmuel said, who told you it's an ear? Because somebody had to teach you that that's an ear. That's a tougher pasha that there's got to be a Torah Shabbal Peh every step of the way. Rabbi Akiva was once asked by one of the Romans, who created the world? He said, Hashem did. He said, prove it. So Rabbi Akiva said to him, who made your sweater? He said, the weaver did. So Rabbi Akiva said, prove it. So he said, well, if there's a sweater, obviously there's a weaver. He said, well, if there's a world, obviously there's a Ribono Shalom. Which we've all been involved in these, usually at a Shabbos table over Sholem. We've always been involved in these arguments. But you just see Chazal were involved in sort of things. It's not something that started nowadays. Chazal were involved in that. We even find Gedolei Yisrael. And I want to make clear that this is not a question of answering, it's a question of responding. I think the classic example that I always use is if you get into a cab and an Israeli cab driver says to you, Tagidli, mata omer ala matzav she, you can fill the blank in with anything. It could be political, financial, security, whatever it is that he asks you. Mata omer, what do you say about the situation with the money, with the Syria, with whatever he says to you? There's only one correct response. When a cab driver says that to you, there's only one correct response. If you've been in Israel for any great length of time, about 8 minutes, you will know that there is only one correct response. And the correct response is to say to the cab driver, Ma'ata Omer. right? Because that's clearly what he wanted. Do you really think that a 60-year-old Israeli cab driver wants the opinion of a 22-year-old American on how to solve all of the problems of this country, which he knows how to solve, and if we would just listen to him, we'd all be in a much better place? Do you really think he wants your opinion? What he really wants you is he wants you to say something so he could then say, well, what I think is, and then he could say, so it's a question, not an answer, it's a question of what is the correct response. A man came to Rav Shteiman, and he told Rav Shteiman that he is Eliyahu Hanavi. Now, I myself, over the course of the years, have met several Eliyahu Hanavis. Maybe one of them was only Pinchas, I'm not sure. I've met several in the course of the years. How do you respond? The guy says, I'm Eliyahu Hanavi. I start looking around, see the men with the white jackets, well, what is the correct, Rav Shteiman said to him? He said, you're Eliyahu Hanavi? You're Eliyahu Hanavi? I said, wow, I've been waiting 95 years to meet you. He says, really? He says, yes. He says, why? He says, because the first Gemara that I learned when I was in Cheder, I learned Kav, Dalet Amos, Kabayim, B'Shmona Amos. The Gemara lives Teku. The Gemara says, Tish B'Yavo. I've been waiting for you. How do we paskin? All right. So Eliyahu Hanavi looked at Rav Shteiman, he goes, you know what, just 1 second, out he went. That was it. That was the last he saw. Last we heard, he's fighting the Nevi'ei Abal. Right? That was an easier battle for him. So you understand the idea, that what's the correct response? The Gedolei Yisrael, another man came to Rav Chaim Kanievsky. Shlita came to Rav Chaim Kanievsky. He told Rav Chaim Kanievsky, I'm the Mashiach. No less. I'm the Mashiach. Problem is, nobody's going to believe me, so I want you to be Mefarsim it. So he said to Rav Chaim. So, now think to yourself for a moment. Formulate a response in your mind. What would you say? Somebody comes and says, I am Mashiach, I want you to be Mefarsim it. Okay? If somebody says to you, I'm Mashiach, I don't want you first, I just want 20 shekels. Whatever he says to you, I am Mashiach. What's your formulate a response? Rav Chaim said to him, there's a Yerushalmi that says that Mashiach is going to come on a donkey that has 100 colors, Mea Gevonim. Do you have a donkey with 100 colors? So the man said, no. He said, okay, get the donkey and then come back and we'll talk. We'll see weiter, what to do weiter. Right? So if you see a man go into the store and buying a lot of colors of paint, that might be, that might, you understand, what do you have to avoid a conflict? You're not Mashiach, I'm telling you you're not Mashiach. If somebody claims not Mashiach, I can listen to rational thought. Anyway, just an example to show us what the concept of how you respond to somebody when somebody starts up. Now, one of the most common questions that I'm asked, young men, very well-meaning and well-intended people would like to go into chinuch and into kiruv v'chokim and so forth. What do I say if somebody asks me, and then you can again fill in the blank. This is a standard question that many people ask. What do I say if somebody asks me how we know Torah is B'Sinai? What do I say if somebody asks me why we know why we wear tefillin? What do I say? The answer is that we have to break it down and see what you should say. A lot depends on the circumstances. What you will say when somebody asks you, now the first rule is usually say, why don't you say the truth? Why don't you tell the truth? How do we know Torah is B'Sinai? So the response is usually a young man says, well, how do we know Torah is B'Sinai? So you don't want to know what to say to somebody else. You want to know, how do you know Torah is B'Sinai? So yes, a little bit of study is in order here before starting. But if somebody comes down, there's an assumption, something lying behind this question is often the false assumption that there's a magic formula that you could just say something to somebody. A guy comes in and he's still got a piece of pork trapped between his teeth, asks you a question, and the next thing you know, he's throwing stones at cars on Shabbos, because you made him from. It doesn't work that way. There is something that happens. There are no magic answers where all of a sudden the eyes light up and wow, from overnight. It doesn't work that way. So the first rule is that, and this is a rule in life to responding to any question anybody ever asks you under any circumstances, kiruv or otherwise. The first rule is try to determine what is it that you're trying to accomplish. Somebody asks you a question. So, for example, you could be confronted by somebody on the street. Why don't the Haredis go to the army? Ever happened to you? If it didn't, then you haven't been in Israel even 8 minutes. Why don't the Haredim go to the army? Right? Now, somebody's asked somebody, now, how do you respond? The question is, what are you trying to accomplish right now? If you're looking for a zinger, people come up with very clever zinging answers. Why don't you go to the army? Well, you could get killed in the army. Why would I want to go? Okay, so you can come up with a zinger, you come up with a witty, clever response, but you accomplish very little. So he says, why do women have to sit at the back of the bus? Well, they're women. We want them as far away from the steering wheel as possible. What do you think? So obviously, you could, but it feels good. It doesn't accomplish a thing. It doesn't accomplish a thing. So it provokes people, and you often get into an argument, but it doesn't really accomplish anything. Guy says, why? This happens in many. Why don't yeshiva bachim learn more nach? Why don't they learn more nach in yeshivas? Did you ever get one of those? Why don't they learn more nach in yeshivas? The obvious answer is because we don't want the boys to come out like you. You learn nach, look what happened. Right? So we obviously don't want to do that, so that then you're not allowed to say that. You don't want to provoke anybody. It's funny. But nothing happens. So the first thing you have to determine is when somebody starts up, what's the goal here? What is my goal? What do I want to do? Zingers? Zingers don't get anywhere. They get put in books. That's what happens. But I don't know anybody who was ever zung and turned around and said, wow, this is a beautiful religion. I want to be part of it. That doesn't happen. And if it's done barabim, it's done in public, then all you do is you alienate him because he's had a negative experience with a religious person. And then you've lost him forever. So you have to always stay focused. What is my goal over here? So ostensibly, if the goal is kiruv, which it should be, the goal is to show, and kiruv, by the way, does not mean answering the question intellectually, and that will therefore create a metamorphosis in his life. The goal is that he should hear the truth, and that he should have had a pleasant experience with a frum person. And I would say that the latter, in many cases, is probably more important than the former. But if somebody is genuinely asking you a question, then you have an obligation to answer. Somebody who's curious, somebody doesn't know, so you have an obligation to answer the question. So the first step, and let's go through this step by step. Step number one is that if your goal is kiruv, the first thing you have to do is determine when somebody asks you a question. For example, somebody says, why should I only eat kosher? Now the first step is, I want to be a makar of this person. Step number one, I know my goal is kiruv. Step number one, determine whether or not it was a question. Gentlemen, Rabosai, one of the traps we fall into in life all the time is that people will say why or what, and it's never intended as a question. Somebody who says to you, why don't the Haredim go to the army? That wasn't a question, that was a statement. We'll deal in a little while with how to respond to statements. If a husband walks into the house and a wife says to him, why did you just walk across the floor? I just washed it. He says, well, I had to get to the refrigerator, get an apple. You know, that is wrong. And again, anybody who's been married any great length of time, like about 8 minutes, knows that is probably the last apple you will ever eat. Right? And there's only one correct response. When a wife says to you just about anything, you know, why didn't you, why didn't you? And the correct response, of course, is, I'm sorry, I'm terrible, I'm a horrible person, so I'm worse than the goat on Yom Kippur. Yeah, that is the correct response, because ultimately, it wasn't a question. It took me a while to learn that. But ultimately, it wasn't a question. That's why men are often confused when a husband comes into the house. I mean, it happens. Husband walks into the house. Husband says to his wife, do you want to go out to eat tonight? And the wife says, what do you mean? Which word didn't you understand? You know, do you want to go with me to eat? You know, now what wasn't clear about that? And the answer is because if a wife wanted to go out to eat, she would never say that. A husband walks into the house and the wife says, does the house look kind of dim? And the husband's thinking, well, we both know it's not. She's telling me it is. She obviously wants to go out. The correct response to does the house look dim is milchiks or fleischiks. That's the correct response, because she obviously wants to go out to eat. So you always have to know, was it really a question? Was there a question? Why did you walk across the floor? She's not interested. She couldn't care less about apples. She wants you to apologize and acknowledge that you are an inconsiderate boor. That was what she was. It was a statement. It was a statement demanding acknowledgement. That's what was going on. Same thing happens when a person, anybody asks you a question. Step number one, if I'm trying to do anything productive, step number one, was that a question or it was not a question? That's step number one, fundamental. Step number two, and I have found this to be extremely efficient in the course of the years, you learn from your mistakes, and I found that when somebody asks a question, so if I'm not sure if it's a question, or even if I suspect it's not a question, so I will simply say, do you want an answer? Now, if it's done in public, you know, sometimes you give a talk or a shiur, and some wise guy wants to make you look bad. Somebody will say something like, oh yeah, so why don't the frum Jews go to the army? Right? Now what you do is you turn to him and say, do you want an answer? Now he doesn't want to look foolish because he just asked that question. If he says no, it makes him look foolish. So then he says yes. Okay, so now you've given me the opportunity to answer the question. Everybody else is going to hear the answer. Then if he starts cutting you off, he's just now given you the question. Then you turn and say, 1 second, I said you wanted an answer. No, you want an argument? An argument I'm not going to give you. That I'm not going to give you anything you want. I will not give you an argument. So you have to first determine, was there a question? This requires a certain amount of maintaining the presence of mind. I do this at home with teenagers as well, especially non-male teenagers. It's a very efficient method. If a daughter comes in and says, Daddy, could I get a new sweater? So when I was young and foolish, I would just say, no, I don't think so. I think you got 47 of them in the closet. I think that's more than enough. How come you never get one of those? No. I haven't got high blood pressure. Can't handle that now. Do you want an answer? Yes. Are you sure you want an answer? Yes. Are you positive? Yes. Are you going to yell at me? No. You're sure you're not going to yell at me? No. Okay, I don't think you need a sweater. That's more or less how these things play out. Now, what the beauty of it is that once the other person is committed to wanting the answer, it does diffuse, it takes away the argument. And frankly, if you get involved in an argument, you accomplish very little. People stand and argue and yell at each other. You ever see these pictures? I remember seeing these pictures in Kiruv, like Shabbatons and stuff, where people are standing in a room and they're arguing, they're arguing with each other and pointing. You don't get any protests where you have the frum arguing with the secular. Nothing's gained from there. You get a lot of maybe entertainment. There's nothing, nobody has been drawn near through that sort of aggressive arguing. Now, if it is a question, then our response to a question is that you answer the truth. Now, this is a very, very tricky area because the Torah is not ours to tamper with. There are no magical answers. What do you say if somebody says to you, is it true we have to annihilate Amalek? What if somebody asks you, is it true we have to annihilate Amalek, men, women, and children? Right? Now, the answer to that is, yes, it's true. You don't necessarily have to answer it at that point, but you're certainly not allowed to fabricate. It's not our Torah to change. If it's in a public forum, you can always say, ooh, that's an important question. See me afterwards. Right? That you could do. And then when a guy comes over afterwards, wait till everybody's out of the room. And then you say, yes, we have to annihilate Amalek, right? And here, I'll give you an actual demonstration. So that is something that you can't do. Obviously, you cannot do that in public. And it might not be a good idea to do that in public. On the other hand, we're not allowed to fabricate. We also are not mechuyev to bring up every topic. I always tell the guys who have been here and they're starting to get interested in Yiddishkeit, when you get home for your first visit, if your parents ask you, what are you learning in yeshiva? Talk about Kibud Av V'Eim. Talk about Shiluach HaKen. Talk about not speaking Lashon Hara. Don't talk about Yefas Toar. And don't talk about Amalek. And don't talk about goats off of cliffs. That's not, it's not the first thing that you have to bring up. So do you have to say, if you're asked about it, you're not allowed to change. You're not allowed to lie. You're not allowed to fabricate. On the other hand, we don't have to reveal absolutely everything right off the bat. Now, number two, and this is essential, is when somebody has asked you a question, a sincere question, somebody who knows nothing about Yiddishkeit is asking you a sincere question, you have to determine, and I see people getting tied into knots over this, you have to determine, first of all, the correct point of departure. That means, let's say somebody secular says to me, why is it that frum Jews cannot pull a cucumber out of their salad on Shabbos on pain of death? Right? What we call borer. Right? So why can't you pull cucumbers out of your salad on Shabbos? So if I start saying, well, because there's a halacha called borer, well, who said, why is there borer? Well, because there's a Mishkan. Well, why did they build the Mishkan? Well, and then I don't agree with the Mishkan, and why do we think that we're better than everybody else? The first question, I have to establish where is this person coming from. Why is it that we wear tefillin? Why don't we pull? Why borer? Why shatnez? Any question. My first response is to somebody who is genuinely interested, not confrontational, somebody's curious. My first response is, okay, do you believe there's a God that created the world? Yes, I do. Okay, good. Do you believe a God gave the Torah? No, I don't. Okay, I got much bigger issues because until we get past that point, there's no possible way I could explain borer or shatnez or basar v'chalav. There's nothing I could possibly explain to somebody who doesn't believe that a God gave the Torah. But I don't believe God gave the Torah, so why is it binding? You understand? So first, let's find out what your point of the problem. Where is it up until where you believe and where is the difficulty? In many cases, people believe Hashem, they believe there's a Torah, they believe in the Torah of Shabbal Peh. They don't believe, and they even believe there's a D'Rabbanan. They just don't believe in current contemporary rabbinic authority. What gave you the authority to okay, so at least I know where the issue really is. The issue isn't on tefillin, and the issue isn't on waiting 6 hours. The issue is that they don't understand what the Rabbanans are. Okay, so let's talk about the Rabbanans. They believe in Torah Shabbal Peh, they believe in Torah B'Shvat, they believe in Rabbanan Shalom, so on and so forth. So you have to nail the point, otherwise you're going to end up there anyway. If you start answering their question at the point that they've asked the question, it's just going to end up, they're going to back you up and back you up and back you up until you get to that point anyway. So you may as well start at that point and establish the framework. It's like a kid. A kid walks into the cockpit of a plane. It happens to all kids, even my age. You walk into the cockpit of the plane, and you take a look, you see a big green button. What does that button do? Right? And it happens to all. What does that button do? You know, the most pilots' response is, why? You know how the rest of it works, that's the only thing you don't know. You know, if you got that, you'll have it all worked out. I mean, how can I explain to you? You walk into a surgical theater. Wow, that's a really sharp knife. What do you cut with that? How do you know anything about what's going on to be able to ask? And if I ask you, you'll say, well, why are you cutting? Why don't you use a laser? And so let's back up. How much do you know about the subject? Okay, this is the point of departure. Sometimes what you want to do is you want to explain to people what's called lishit. You know, in the Gemara we use an expression lishitascha. Sometimes we want to say lishitasenu. That's also acceptable. And the guy says to me, look, I don't believe there's a God. But I'll grant it for those who would believe there's a God. Why do you wear tefillin? What's the idea behind Shabbos and so on and so forth? That you could do. I don't expect you to believe, and you don't believe in that right now. But lishita seinu, for those of us who believe there's a God and there's a God system and there's a Torah and there's a binding Torah, so for a binding Torah, this is what results from a binding Torah. It's very interesting, one of the common questions that's come up over the years is people say, why don't more frum women pursue careers? Why don't more women pursue careers? They'll frum women work, right? They certainly work, but why don't they pursue careers in the professions to rise in the profession as much as possible? So one of the answers they give is, well, from women, if you look around you, from women often have many children. And when you're raising many children, that does not, it just is not conducive to advancing in a career. Just before we get into any ideologies, any hashkafa, just on a practical level, a from woman who is having a child every 2 years is not somebody she's got to put time and energy into her family and into her children. So the next follow-up question is always going to be, well, why does she have to have so many children? So the answer to your question, ultimately, why don't frum women pursue careers, is lishita seinu. Lishita seinu, that the Torah is binding. And lishita seinu, that a family is not allowed to limit their size unless there are extenuating circumstances. So lishita seinu, it comes out just before you get into any hashkafa, before any hashkafa begins. And Avada, there's hashkafa behind it. But before you even get there, just on a practical level, but it's all lishita seinu, because they're going to say, well, who says you have to have so many children? So you right back. So let's go back to basics, and there's a binding Torah with binding halacha and so on and so forth, and based on that. So again, essential. Number one, determine if it's a question. Number two, ask if the person really wants an answer, which often you can tell in the tone whether they do or don't. Number three, make sure you find the correct point of departure. Make sure you find out where their confusion is really stemming from. And number four, make sure sometimes you have to take the form of going lishita seinu and explaining it for somebody, roughly the equivalent, lahavdol elef alfei havdolas, if we would ever want to understand another religion. So obviously we don't buy into it, we don't believe any of it and so on and so forth, but I would like to know where they who do whatever it is that they do in their religion, where are they coming from? Obviously we think it's all hevel avolim, but I'd like to understand, what do they think is behind it? I don't want to go into any protim of any other religions in a base medrash, but that's the idea, that's the approach. More than that is you often have to hear when somebody does ask a question, what is he really asking? You could have a middle ground here. You could have the person who's asking a question, he's not asking anything at all, he's attacking you. You have the person who is asking a question and what he's asking is really what he's asking. Then you have the person who's asking a question and you sense that underlying the question is really a different question, and you want to, and he's asking respectfully. He's asking respectfully, and you want to get to what's underlying the question. Two examples: Rabbi Yitzchak Spector, who was the Posek Hador. He once got a very well-known story. He once got a letter from a nearby town. There was a shaila in Isser v'Heter. Somebody asked, the two guys sent him a letter to Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan asking him a question. You're there. So Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan took a look at the letter, and he thought to himself, look, first of all, I know the Rav in the town. And the Rav in the town is a Talmid Chacham. This is not that difficult a question. I don't know why they didn't just go to the Rav of the town, number one. Number two, I've never had a correspondence from these two guys before. You got Rabbanim knew there. And these two guys signed on a letter, and they're asking a shaila, which the Rav in the town, he said, what must have happened here is that these are the Dasan and Aviram of the town. They're looking to give the Rav a hard time. So what must have happened is somebody asked the Rav the shaila, and he paskined incorrectly, and they know it. And now they want me to send the correct answer. I'll write back to her. They'll go around the town showing how Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan paskin different than the Rav. They'll be mevaza the Rav. So what he did was he wrote the incorrect answer in a letter, and he sent it in the mail. Then he went to the post office and he sent a telegram. And in the telegram he wrote, it's a difficult shaila. I wrote it in a letter, but I wrote the incorrect answer. Ignore the contents of the letter. This is really the correct answer. And he sent the telegram. So now they're blocked, mimonavshach. If they show the letter in town, so Rabbi Elchanan paskin like the Rav. If they show the telegraph that he sent, what's it called? Telegraph. Does anybody in this room know what that? Telegram, right? A telegram. I don't know if any of you even know what that is. It was around during the Middle Ages, and they sent a. He says, if I show him the telegram, even Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan says in the telegram that's a difficult shaila, and he got confused with it. So now, what happened? The godless here, the pichos of Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan, is that he heard this, saw the question, he understood that question is not the question. A man came to Rav Shteiman Shlita, and he said to Rav Shteiman, it's close to Pesach, he said to Rav Shteiman, there's a chumrah, in Erev Pesach, you take a toothpick, and you scrape between the tiles. He said to Rav Shteiman, is it an important chumrah to keep? Scrape between the tiles, scrape out the chametz with a toothpick. So Rav Shteiman looked at him and said, it's a very important chumrah. It's so important, you can't rely on your wife to do it. Yeah. I'll bet you that wasn't done that year. That I can. I'll bet all of a sudden, he turned into, he's no longer such a machmer. Because Rav Shteiman, Birov Pichuso, understood, guess what he's asking? He's going to be Moser, his wife's nefesh. That's what he's asking. So Rav Shteiman understood, you know what, that's not going to happen, because he understood that's what he heard in the question. It's very important that if I hear somebody ask a question, to hear what exactly is behind the question. Finally, dealing with statements and opinions. Now, opinions I just had this happen recently. In a religion, there are many people who would never think in a million years to offer an opinion on engineering. Nobody's going to come, nobody who is not studying engineering is going to help them what went wrong on the Tappan Zee Bridge if they haven't studied engineering and construction. Well, this is what I think you ought to do with cranes. None of us would suggest it unless you've studied it. Nobody's about to go and make financial suggestions unless they are financial experts. Nobody's going to make medical suggestions. When it comes to religion, it's open season. When it comes to Yiddishkeit, everybody's got an opinion. This one's I'm an atheist. You're an atheist. Obviously, a person who thinks he's an atheist obviously isn't an atheist, because to be an atheist means you've studied the subject well, and you've concluded that there's no God. That's an atheist. No, have you studied the subject well? No. So what's your opinion based on? Based on ignorance. So you're not an atheist, you're an ignoramus. That's a big difference. You're not an atheist, that's not an atheist. Or, no, I'm an agnostic. What's an agnostic? An agnostic is somebody who says, I don't know, we can't know. That's really the definition. How do you get to the point where you say we can't know? If you can't know because you're 19 years old and you've never done anything that reads right to left, so obviously you can't know, right? And you probably know nothing about anything other than your iPhone. So you probably know nothing. You're not an agnostic, you're a viter. You're the second ignoramus of the day. An agnostic is somebody who has studied the subject and he's come to that conclusion. You have to study the subject. What's your opinion worth if you've never studied the subject? So unfortunately, when it comes to Yiddishkeit, everybody thinks that he's got an opinion. You've got to, I feel, your feeling is also why you are now bankrupt. You felt that way about the stock market too, right? So we know what your feeling means. You understand? So what's a feeling worth? So only time that a responsible opinion is responsible is a person has studied the subject and then offers a responsible opinion. So what do we do with statements? Somebody makes a statement. So the first rule in life is, whoever said that you have to respond to statements? Let me try to shock you, and we get this all the time. Anybody, if you look even somewhat rabbinic, people love to pick on you, right? People love to, but you become free. You're a free game, because you're a rabbi. So he comes and says, I don't believe the Torah was from Sinai. My response is, oh, okay. What do you expect to happen? Do you expect me to melt? My goodness, such a well thought out statement. You expected me to just go to pieces? I'm not going to acknowledge you, but you feed right in. If somebody is willing to ask you, so you respond. So I make statements to statements. We say, oh, okay. If you want, you could grunt, right? Whatever works. The last thing you should do is go to pieces. The last thing you should do is to just, it's like happens with mothers and children all the time, where children make preposterous statements. So a 7-year-old says, Mommy, when I'm 19, I'm going to bungee jump. Mother, no, oh my goodness, and the mother just thinks that, she's just, my goodness, where did we go wrong over here? And she already sees him zipping around, 19 years old, hey kid, my response is, well, is it going to be a long cord or a short cord, right? Is it going to be off of a crane or off of a cliff, A lot is going to happen between 7 and 19. You have to respond to every preposterous statement that everybody makes, number one. Number two, Chazon Ish was once walking with the Talmud, and somebody said something outlandish. And the Talmud turned around and gave him, it gave him a zinger. So the Chazon Ish turned to his Talmud and said, you did not respond like a Ben Torah. So he said, why? How does a Ben Torah respond? So Chazon Ish said, a Ben Torah does not respond. That's the correct response. Who said you have to respond? Who said you have to answer every foolishness that anybody said? That's how you say people get dragged into arguments. And so a lot of people say, yeah, but I feel good. I don't want to be stepped on, and I like to show that we stand up for ourselves as well. There is a time and a place for that, especially if you're the rabbim, and somebody's trying to, in front of the tzibur, somebody is trying to make you look bad. He's secular, trying to make you look bad. There is a time and a place to sacrifice the yochid for the good of the tzibur. Most of the time it's not like that. Most of the time the correct response is to smile and say, have a nice day, or come to my house for Shabbos. That is the correct response, as opposed to getting into an argument. I was sitting once at the Shabbos table. It was before I started Or Sameach, and a young lady was sitting at the Shabbos table. It was Lil Shabbos, and this young lady said that she read the story of a tzaddik in our time. Many of you have read that, my autobiography. Just want to see if you're listening. It's Rabbi Aryeh Levin, the story of Rabbi Aryeh Levin, a tzaddik in our time. So she says to me that, and of course, she was the whole get out. She was a vegetarian, and she played guitar, and she was anti anything that we would be for, and so on and so forth. And so left was right, right was left, good was bad, bad was terrific. And that was. So she said to me that Rabbi Aryeh Levin is one of the most selfish people she's ever read about. I was an avrech. I'm trying to eat, lady. Come on, give me a break. Rabbi Aryeh was one of those. So I said, how so? How so? So she said, well, you believe that for every mitzvah you get reward, don't you? Yeah. She goes, well, he did a lot of mitzvahs because he wanted reward, so he's selfish. So I had several answers. First thought was, well, then try it. Be selfish. Because she's just the epitome of giving in goodness. So go ahead, be selfish. Number one. Number two, how do you know what his motivation was? There are people who actually do things with a little bit l'shem shamayim, and maybe not in her university campus. It's difficult to drink beer l'shem shamayim, but there are people in the world who do things that are l'shem shamayim. And at the end, I just kind of was more speechless, if you could believe that. I was more like, oh, okay, I think we discussed it a little bit. We discussed Charbonnet. I don't remember what happened. But looking back, who said you have to respond to it? Well, sometimes if you let the statement hang in the air, I remember one young lady came to the house once also. I said to her, just trying to make conversation. I said to her, she was a vegetarian. I think I was warned in advance she's a vegetarian. So just trying to be polite, I said, do you eat fish? So she said, no, if it has a heartbeat, I don't eat it. And I said, well, we don't either. We kill it first. But, So that, it was, okay, and I don't remember after that, we got along famously after that, I don't remember what happened exactly, but sometimes, who says you have to respond to everything? That was her whole life was being a vegetarian. Who says you have to let her be a non-carnivorous vegetarian? Okay, that's what she enjoys. Who says you have to respond? And more importantly, you don't get anywhere with it. You don't get anywhere. You have a good argument. So you walk away from an argument feeling frustrated. That's usually what happens. I had a kid once at a Gateway's Shabbaton in America. So the kid sat down, and he came over. He was not yet off the derech, but he was close to off the derech. He came from a religious home, but he was bitter. He was clearly bitter. And he sat down, and he said to me very aggressively, "Why can't the Rabbanim be matir?" I don't remember what it was, agunas or something. "Why can't the Rabbanim be matir?" in a very aggressive tone. So I looked at him, and I said, "Do you want an answer?" "Yes." I said, are you sure you want an answer?" "Yes." I said, "Do you want to argue with me, or do you want to hear what I have to say?" "I want to hear what you have to say." So I started talking. He started cutting me off. I said, I thought you wanted to hear what I have to say. I thought you didn't want to argue." He says, right. So he sat on his hands. He tried to behave himself. You could see the steam was coming out of every ears, nose, and you could see. And he's just trying to listen politely while I'm talking. And at a certain point, he says, "Okay, now what I think," and I looked at him, and I did this for a reason. I'll tell you in advance why I did this. I did this because I made an assessment that what he needed, he wasn't interested in anything I had to say or what anybody else said. What he needed, what I felt at the time, there's only one thing he would take away, which is a little respect for our religion. That's what I felt he needs. A little bit more respect for Rabbanim, a little respect for him. Now, I'm not one of the Rabbanim, but he thought I was. And so I said to him, he said, "Well, what I'd like to, and what I think is," I said, I really don't want to hear." He goes, "What?" He said, I'm really not that interested." He goes, "Why not?" I said, "Because how much have you studied that you know about the subject? Right? How do you know anything about the subject? So how much I learned," he said to me, I remember him saying, "I've learned." I learned. He learned. I don't know what he learned. He said, "I've learned." And my sense was, no, he hasn't. I knew he hadn't. And he knew that I knew that he hadn't. As I wanted him to understand, this isn't a free-for-all here. It's not something, I look back, I always go back to that moment, and I wish that I would have said to him, "Okay, I'll explain to you why." You see, it has to do with the principle of gud asik. "What? Oh, you don't know what gud asik is?" "Oh, sorry. It has to do with ma'im notfim." "What's that?" "Oh, well, listen, how can you possibly understand without, you go through a few concepts before they go, well, migud nafshe zachavre. You don't know what that is? You expect to understand this without knowing basics and fundamentals? Right? That way to show him. The reason I did it was because I felt that the Torah is not hefker, and what he needs to know is that if there are rabbanim who paskin in certain ways and there are issues, he should know that the Torah is not something that is a free-for-all. And I said to him, I said to him, "Look, I've been studying for 30 years. I know about the subject. You haven't studied them. What you have to study, you can't just go around offering opinions." He did not like me. When he got up and walked away, he did not like me. But under the circumstances, I felt that was a more important lesson for him. So the bottom line of all of it is that I think the most important point is, person, make sure that you know what your goal is. The goal is to do the Ratzon Hashem. If we do the Ratzon Hashem, we'll be Zocha, Hashem, to all of the Yeshuas. Amen.